in this
I think you told me about that.
really a representation of several hours of a deep dive into the concerns and the questions that the delegation has had over the past few months. And hopefully we can answer all those questions in finality and good detail. And present here tonight are members of the delegation, not all, but some. If you would like to say who you are as delegates,
Start here.
you can start there, yeah.
John Callum, Sullivan District 6, Newport, and Unity.
Representative Judy Aaron, Sullivan District 7, that's Ackworth, Goshen, Langdon, Munster, and Washington.
Representative Skip Rollins, District 6, Newport Unity.
And Representative John Cloutier, Sullivan County District 10, entire city of Claremont.
Representative Lee Oxman, Sullivan District 1.
Linda Tanner, Sullivan District 9, the towns of Plainfield, Cornish, Croydon, Grantham, Springfield, Sunapee, Newport, and Unity.
Got them all.
Sue Gotling, Sullivan District 2, Sunapee and Croydon.
Gary Merchant, Sullivan District 4, Claremont Ward 2.
Representative Walt Stapleton, Sullivan District 5, Claremont Ward 3.
And the commissioner.
Brian Sullivan, Sullivan County District 1.
Chief of Commissioner. And we also have with us the staff from the nursing home, and Mary Bork, our department, our facilities director. And we have representation from Warren Street and Millstone Architects. And they're here to hopefully answer questions that were asked in the past. And if you'd be patient, please listen to what these people have to say. I think you'll get a lot out of it. They spent hours and hours on this presentation, and I think they really deserve to be heard. So I appreciate everybody staying. Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Yes, thank you, that's the right one. Done so many of these. Thank you, Commissioner Hebert. My name is Mary Burke. I'm the Director of Facilities and Operations for Sullivan County. And I am the project manager for this project for the county. If you could go forward, Derek.
Yeah, I'm just making sure I got the screen share.
As Commissioner Hebert mentioned, we have representatives from the full team here tonight that are going to help contribute some of the information that we would like to share. And so the presentation is built on questions that have come up in previous meetings that we've heard that need some more clarification, as well as informal questions and inquiries that have come outside of our more formal meetings. So the goal of tonight's project isn't necessarily to do a review of the project, it's to answer these specific questions, and hopefully that information will help move the process of evaluating and approving the project move forward. So we're going to talk about a few of the different questions. If you could, yes, go ahead. Okay. We are nowhere near the beginning of this.
Slide 443.
Okay, yes, we're out of order. I mean, it's fine. I'm out of order in my head.
Okay.
So, it's been a long day. So we're going to talk about the design basis for 156 beds. That has come up a few times as why 156 beds, particularly when we've run an average census in the past lower than that. So we'll talk a little bit about how the nursing home works as far as bed management and what the goals are for a future with 156 beds. And then we'll talk about some scope reductions that we've evaluated as potentials for cost savings without going back to the very beginning, and how we could incorporate those into the project, and what the financial impact of those are to the project, as well as to the nursing home operations long-term. And we've also heard some informal questions about assisted living. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, but go ahead. So 156 bed design. This started from analysis of the 2016 state and county population projections. And what that shows is for Sullivan County, by 2025, the nursing home would need a range from 128 beds to 186 beds. If you could just hit me. And so in 2015, Sullivan County also engaged a consultant to complete a market analysis. So between those two efforts, the consultant projected that there would be a need for 160 beds at Sullivan County Healthcare. We currently are licensed for 156, and so that's where the baseline number of 156 comes from. And then also at this time, the state is very restrictive on issuing new bed licenses. One more time?
Are you taking questions?
At the end, please.
Okay.
And so we focus on that 156 number because in past presentations you've heard of an effort by Harriman that did some conceptual work, and they lowered what the design number of beds should be. And so through our initial effort with Warren Street Architects, we really looked at how the nursing home operates and what services would benefit the county in the long term to help offset some of the lower revenues from the Medicaid populations we serve, and targeted potential expansion of our short-term rehabilitation services, and really felt that once the building was complete, we could run closer to the 156 number. And so as part of this process, in August of 2019, Sullivan County Board of Commissioners and the delegation each approved moving forward with a design that maintained that 156 bed design as we currently are licensed. So to talk a little bit about what it means to have 156 beds in the facility and how that relates to an operational census and how residents move through the facility, I'm going to invite April Bartley, who is the Director of Nursing, to come up and talk a little bit about how the nursing home works.
Thank you, Mary. So, you know, just to get back to what we were saying about operational capacity, or what Mary was saying about the 156 beds. In the nursing home industry, the operational capacity for a facility with 156 beds is really closer to 148. If it was a 100-bed facility, it would be roughly 95% of that, or 95. And these are some of the reasons why we need to have some open beds in our facility to operate smoothly, to provide the right care to the right resident and the right unit, quite frankly. We're not a hotel. We don't turn over rooms in the way that a hotel might. You know, somebody doesn't check in, get the room clean and checked out. There's more time and effort that needs to go into making sure we're providing the right care. So, new admissions. To accommodate new admissions, we have to have a place to put people. That's being responsive to our referral sources. In an era of shorter hospital stays, we're expected to be responsive to our referral sources. Dartmouth, Hitchcock, New London Hospital, they're not waiting days for us to get people in. They want us to take people quickly. In order to do that, we have to have room to put them. That does not mean just on the one unit where we're taking admissions, and we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean when we get to the next slides. We need dedicated rooms for end of life. We do end of life care at Sullivan County very well, but it requires time and space. We have, at this point in time, we have one room that we keep open. We try to keep open all the time for end of life care. But that's very fluid. Sometimes that has to move to another floor. Sometimes that means not filling a bed so that someone dying can die with dignity, with their family and friends and whoever they want in attendance. Internal room moves. Maybe we have a resident who is suddenly wandering and needs a secure space, we need to have room to be able to move them to the McConnell unit or the Stearns 3 unit where we have secure beds for that setting. And then, of course, we have our residents who go into the hospital for either short-term medical care or procedures or current illness. So we have to hold those beds for those patients. Those beds don't just get turned over. We are required to hold those beds in order for them to be able to return to our facility. So next slide, Derek. So this demographic, or this, not demographic, this graphic really illustrates what we're trying to do. You'll see that we try to keep open beds on Stearns 1 primarily, and that's because that's our short-term unit where we take most of our admissions from the community. That could be from hospitals, that could be straight from the community. Oftentimes, we are not taking people who are alert and oriented. We're taking people with challenging medical needs, psychosocial needs, dementia. Before COVID, we were dealing with another pandemic. It was called early onset dementia. So we were trying to manage these people. We are trying to manage these people by bringing them to the Stearns 1 unit, assessing what their needs are, and then trying to make sure that we transition them to the correct unit for their care. McConnell is and we'll get to that slide actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. But again, it's the right resident, the right care at the right time, and that means having flexibility within our facility to do that work. I think I'm ready for the next slide. Derek? So resident flow from the facility, 95% of our admissions enter the Stearns 1 unit. That is where our post-acute short-term rehab care takes place. It's now where our quarantine unit is for admissions. 70% of those admissions are going to go somewhere within our facility. Maybe they're going to go to Stearns 3, which is memory care for people who are not moving around too much. Maybe they're in wheelchairs, they're not needing the space that the McConnell unit provides. Maybe they're going to Stearns 2, which is more traditional long-term care with people who are cognitively intact, less dementia, less confusion. Or maybe they're wandering around and they need that therapeutic space that McConnell provides for people who need that care. So we don't know that necessarily on admission. Sometimes it's really clear. They need to go to McConnell, so we need to have a place to put them, or maybe they need to go to Stearns 3, but sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we have to take that time to assess that resident and take the time to get to know them. So it's not as simple as put them in a bed, any bed will do. We have to make sure it's the right bed, again, the right place, the right time. That happens all the time. Rarely, not beyond just happening on admission. During the course of care with us at Sullivan County, it is not uncommon, in fact, it's most common to see somebody come in one state of physical health or cognition and change over time. We need to have the ability to move them to the proper unit at that time. I'll give an example, too, of another need that comes up quite a bit. McConnell unit, as many of you know, is our newest unit. Built in 1997, it's beautiful. It's got huge rooms. They've got foot-to-foot. Have any of you seen McConnell? I don't know. Have all of you seen our McConnell unit, how it's set up? It's very nice, much nicer than the Stearns unit. We will admit people to that unit who are ambulatory, needing that space to wander around, get the therapeutic dementia care they need. And over time, they decline physically. They don't need that unit anymore. So we talk with families about moving them to one of the other units, usually Stearns 3, because that's also memory care where there's not so much mobility. And they don't want to do it because the facility is tired, it's old. I have 5 families there right now that are like, no thanks, they're going to stay right there on McConnell. So if we were able to move them on to a nice, refreshed space, we would have instant availability for some of the people in our community that needs McConnell. So again, I can't stress enough, the need for dementia care, specialized dementia care, is really, it's important for us to be able to be fluid in how we meet the needs of our residents and make sure we have the right place to put people. So I hope that helps to describe a little bit about how we transition people within the facility and the varying specialties, I guess, within the facility. It's not a bed equals a bed equals a bed. They're all very different. The care that's provided on each floor is different. So open bed on one floor does not equal an open bed on another floor. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, April. Of course. So we'll move on to some of the evaluation that we did of the current design to take a look at were there places that we could reduce scope. And so we'll talk through a few of these. But we're also going to talk about is reducing scope not only is reducing square footage to save costs on the project, it has some other impacts as well too. Both in, once you remove that square footage, what was the program? What was the county originally going to do with that space? In terms of the nursing home, a lot of times if that's resident rooms, that means a loss of revenue. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But also too, we are at 100% construction drawings. The full set is over 300 drawings, and it is ready to go immediately as soon as someone were to come. We have state approval from DHHS, in which I'll commend Warren Street Architects and their sub-consultants. For a project this size, we had less than a page and a half of comments from the reviewer for DHHS, which is absolutely unheard of. The drawings are just phenomenal. And I know the amount of time and care that has gone into them. So to go at this point and look at how we reduce scope to change the overall cost of the project really does have a great impact on the project as a whole. So I'd like to invite Jonathan Hawley. Are you going to come up? Yes. Jonathan Hawley from Warren Street Architects to talk a little bit about the areas that we looked at in a pure way to just say, how do we cut dollars from the overall project? And then I'll finish up to talk about how some of that impacts the project as a whole, and then talk about some of the smaller things that we looked at.
Mary, is this your slide or is it?
Jonathan's going to talk through this one.
All right, cool.
I think we have the same slide, so thank you, Mary. My name's Jonathan Hawley. I'm here with my two colleagues, Jonathan Smith, who's the more technical architect for the project, and Caroline, who has been drawing this project for 3 years. I just want to talk a little bit about scope change. I want to talk a little bit about the project. I would really encourage you guys, I know that there's some conflict amongst you as to this moving forward. We have spent 3 years having met with the nursing home on a regular basis and have talked through every dimension, if you can imagine, of how the nursing home works. And in doing that, it's a puzzle. This is not a simple project. So when you talk about scope change, anything is possible. Money can do anything. We all can agree to that. But this particular building is riddled with problems. It is old, it is tired, and it was built in an era when it was a particular construction type. So we have made decisions along the way that kind of overlap and are very difficult to unravel without unraveling the entire project. A couple of examples. The existing building has a very, very shallow floor-to-floor height. In order to match the floor-to-floor heights so that we have consistent floors with the addition, we had to go to a proprietary structural system to make that work. Today, if we were starting new, we would build steel with bar joists. There would be 3 feet of plenum space between the floors. There'd be room to run ductwork and electric and fire and all of the rest of those things. We don't have that. So in order the decision was made, we looked at, do we skip a floor? Do we do every other floor? And we looked at how that affects the program and how it affects staffing counts and how do they match this up with, it just doesn't work. So we've backed ourselves into the most efficient structural system that we can. And when we do that, we're driven into certain mechanical systems that have to be vertical from the top down because we can't do it horizontally. So I'm just telling you this to preference. We can make changes, but they're very difficult to do. Ted and Mary have pushed us along the way to chisel and to narrow the scope to get it as tight in terms of efficiency as we can, to get the square footages down as much as we can. And along the way, other issues within the county have come up and program has been added. We added the commissioner's offices from Claremont, from Newport, and moved them there. That solved other problems. There were renovation costs for a Hearn, which are spaces that are outside of the nursing home that are used, that we brought inside because it was more efficient to build that internally than to renovate outside. I mentioned mechanical systems. You know, you have a proprietary system there that can't be taken offline. We can't disconnect the nursing home because the system won't carry just the jail. So we had to look at certain things. And as we talk about, as we go forward here, like one of the options that we've looked at is to take off the third floor, just reduce the census count and the beds. The issue then is all of the systems are designed for the area of that third floor. So it's not just take it away. To be responsible, we'd have to go back and look at all of the equipment and downsize that equipment. If anybody knows mechanical systems, you want them to run at a certain efficiency to be efficient. So in looking at scope change, I will tell you this, that construction pricing in the last year in different divisions, you know, pieces and parts, whether it's wood or electrical or mechanical, have risen 30 to 50%. Prices have gone crazy. A 2x4, an 8-foot 2x4 is $10 today. 3 years ago, it was $285. So we're dealing with significant cost increases that Milestone can talk to a little bit. So one of the things in terms of reducing scope, we would have to come to some agreement as to what the goal is if we were to try to reduce scope. And so when Mary came to us and said, you know, there were 6 or 8 different scenarios, you know, what's involved? Well, the involvement is we have to basically go back and peel that onion and figure out how to redesign these pieces and parts, and it doesn't happen overnight. So we're thinking that with some of the concepts that have been talked about, that's about a 6-month duration from start to finish to get to the drawings. One of the things that we've challenged ourselves and we've managed to get through is DHHS now does not have a plan reviewer. Wendy Schmigalski, if anybody knows Wendy, has retired. Her assistant, Ken Walsh, is no longer there. They don't have a plan reviewer. What we did over the last year is Beverly Kwalik, who works for the state, actually was an employee of DHHS at one time, and Doreen, who's the supervisor there, agreed that she's actually a fire prevention engineer. She's actually capable of doing the plan review. We paid her, and she's actually done that. This project is completely approved. Moving forward, since that point, Wendy has retired. There is nobody at DHHS. So when we change this plan set, in whatever the scope might be, and take it through another time, I can't tell you what that review process is going to look like because there's nobody at the state agency to do those reviews. Right now, material availability, and again, Milestone can speak a little more to this a little later, deliverables and availability of certain pieces and parts have long lead items. I was told a couple of weeks ago, Canium told a contractor that we're dealing with that bar joists, steel bar joists, are 12 months out from the day that you order them. So, and it trickles down. The longer that we delay this, the delivery timelines and the availability of materials are not going to overnight just become available. And what it's going to do is it's going to drive inflation. We're going to see prices, you know, at least stay what they are or continue at a higher rate. They may come down, but they're not going to come down to what they were pre-COVID or a year before that. So again, this is all part of talking about changes of scope. Another issue that I want to throw on the table, and again, it's something that I can't tell you what the impact would be, but as we were going through this process, when we were first hired, the previous firm that was involved that did this study did it based on the codes and the standards that were prior. There was an adoption of codes that changed everything at the beginning of this process. It affected the size of the rooms, it affected everything in terms of healthcare. We're up against that again. The state legislature is reviewing the 2018 building code review, so there is the possibility in August that they approve that, which would throw us into a new code book. So I can't tell you what those changes might be, but it's another issue. If we delay this longer, it's risk on your part, because I can't tell you what that might happen.
Jonathan, if I could just point out that when it did change from 2015 to 2018 with the IBC, we did an exercise to pull out the scope, and we figured that it added about $1.5 million to the project the last time that happened.
I can't tell you, what that impact might be down the road, but I can tell you that every time they do a code change, things get tighter, there's more oversight, there's more restrictions, there's more codes, so it could affect essentially the plan that we have here, and we won't know that until probably August or September when it goes before the State House for a vote. I think those are the things that I wanted to touch on. Mary mentioned that we have both DHHS and State Fire Marshal approval of the project. So it has been vetted by a third-party reviewer, a fire protection engineer. Beverly Kowalik has vetted it in terms of the FGI healthcare guidelines. And the State Fire Marshal has been through it as well. So we're completely approved and ready to go. I don't know, John, do you want to talk about, my partner John Smith was going to talk a little bit about, Mary had challenged him to look at reducing the bed count, and there's a diagram here. I'm just going to turn this just a little bit so you can see it.
Hello, everybody. My name's Jonathan Smith. So Caroline and I were the leads on this project, and I've talked to the engineers and walked through a couple of possibilities to reduce bed count here. So in both of these, this is two separate proposals. 6 beds per floor on each of these. So it's 2 places in the design that we feel that would be the easiest to make this change. The first of which is removing 6 beds across the front here of the existing Stearns building. And the second of all is taking these 6 here off in the back of Stearns. They both have different impacts to the plan and different challenges. We're concentrating right now on the front 6. This one has some mechanical challenges as well as a greater structural impact to the building because a lot of our lateral bracing is in this quadrant here. And by removing this, it's going to push a redesign of the steel system for the upper 3 floors in that whole addition. In this addition here, in this portion here, we're only losing 2 braces, so hopefully that would be much less impact overall on the project. Although the front addition, this bottom one, does affect our phasing for the project. So our first step in this project was to try to figure out how to add beds to this building, how to put an addition on the building and build it so that each phase of the project, of which there are 6 in this project, we would be able to continue meeting fire code and DHHS requirements and maintain, I believe, 138 beds was our goal. And so that's what this plan represents. This is actually a very important piece of that phasing because it allows this center area of the plan to be renovated independently of the ends. So that would be a challenge in this plan as well. I think it would actually add a phase to renovating the Stearns building in the latter half of the project in order to break the pieces down and still provide access through those areas. That's my guess, at least. So all right, so the front scheme, as I said, I think is a lesser impact than the back scheme. I mentioned the phasing. This has a lesser impact on egress in the building. It does affect one egress stair. And that egress stair, or this existing stern stair, would have to be modified in the first floor in order to maintain our exiting during the phasing portion of the projects. And also the, no, I lost it. Oh, also, this has lesser HVAC impact on the project as well, because most of our vertical chases out of the boiler room all happen at this end of the building. So this is more of the tail end of the system versus the head end of the system. So that is the location that we have focused on most. Just to be clear, I should have mentioned it in the previous slide, but the orange or yellow section are the areas being deleted, and the blue section here is the area that has to be redesigned in order to accommodate the changes in the front. Is there anything else?
Next slide. Do you want to
Is
talk a
that
little bit
right?
about this? Yep.
Sure. So another scheme that we came up with or discussed, which is a much bigger reduction, is the deletion of the top floor of the addition. So one thing that predicates this is, I don't know if everybody here knows that Stearns was actually built in 2 phases. The first 3 stories were built in '68, and then 4 years later they added a floor on top. So in this case, by taking a floor off the top of this addition, you would end up losing an entire floor of beds. So you lose 40 beds. There's, gotta remember my numbers. There's 13 beds in Stearns, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's 13 beds in Stearns, and there is the remainder, 27 beds, in the addition. And by removing this floor, it has a number of impacts. One is, at least in talking to the nursing home, it impacts the usability of the top floor Stearns, because you're down to a unit that's only 13 beds. And that would be a challenge staffing-wise to maintain that as a unit in any way. The second challenge to the top floor Stearns is that the structural system was designed for residential use only. It has a 40-pound per square foot load capacity, so that negates its reuse for any type of office or storage spaces within the building. So it would have to be basically mothballed without a full structural upgrade of the entire Stearns building. So I think that between the 13 beds and the fact that you have to structurally upgrade the building, that it would probably be impractical to use the 4th floor of Stearns should the top floor of the addition be removed. And then I brought up the previous Stearns project, building it in 2 phases vertically. All of our mechanical systems run through the 4th floor. That's all your piping, all your HVAC, everything that is horizontally running through this building is in that roof cavity. By removing the floor, we'll be moving that system down, which would make it very difficult to try to reuse or to add that floor in the future. Because we would actually have to literally disconnect the entire system, pick it up a floor, and which in an operational nursing home, I think would be impractical as well.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Sure.
You want to go to the next slide? So I'll go back to one of the graphics that April had that showed distribution of the residents. So this option that Jonathan was just talking about, it grays out really Stearns 3, so it grays out that whole unit to indicate that we would have a much smaller capacity. So the design would be 114 beds, and so if you go back to what April was talking about, a 95% maximum operational capacity, we're talking about being able to take 108 residents at a time. And so that is a great variance from what our current operational system is. And because the main portion of our mission is to serve the Medicaid population, going down to a size this small would really prohibit us from being able to take the private pay insurance residents that help offset the lower payment rate that we get reimbursed for our Medicaid rates. You want to go to the next slide? So let's take a look at these two options. So on the left is the 138 bed design. So that's what Jonathan Smith talked about, cutting off the 6 beds on each floor at the front of the building, and then the 114 bed design, which is taking off the top floor of the addition. And so when we took a look into carving out what these square footages represented is it's down in low in the greenish blue square, but it says that the deduct for the project to remove 18 beds is $2.2 million. And so I think the general population would probably assume to cut that many beds would be a lot higher number than that. But what happens when you cut square footage is you don't cut the dollar amount for the square footages in the same way that you do when you add it. If we were to reduce the square footage, our mechanical systems would change probably a little, but not a lot. There's still a lot of things that we have to do that serve the overall building, and there's a lot just to get a construction project going that disperses itself all over the building. So when you carve away square footage like that, it doesn't come off at the same rate. And so if we take a look at what that means by taking 18 beds away, is based on Medicaid reimbursement rates, 18 beds represents an annual net loss of revenue to the nursing home of $1.25 million. So when you take a look at what the value of that revenue is over the course of the life of the building, or over 50 years, that represents almost $40 million in net revenue to the county by having those beds available. For the same exercise, if we look at going down to 114 bed design, which I think when we all dig into the numbers, we'll realize that that doesn't serve our mission. That decreases the project by about $4.4 million. It represents an annual net loss revenue of $3.2 million. And again, if you take what the value of that revenue is over the life of the building of 50 years, you're over $100 million in lost revenue. So the value of a bed built is quite extensive versus when you compare that to what the value is to save that dollar, the 2.2 million or the 4.4 million, to save that today. So there was a little note at the bottom of the last screen that said that I didn't consider how escalation affects this. And so Jonathan Hawley talked a little bit about any significant change would require probably about a 6-month design time. And you add an estimated 3-month review time based on what the current staffing is at DHHS. We don't know that we could even put a time on that, but we did. We said 3 months. And so if we were to reopen up the design of this project, we would estimate that it would delay us about 9 months. So while you look at these two options to save either $2.2 million or $4.4 million, while Warren Street and their subconsultants are working away, the construction climate is moving on, and things are escalating between 7 and 10% as things get more expensive, either materials or labor. So waiting a 9-month period to start building the project, the remaining scope of the project escalates about $3 million. So now, by cutting down Cutting down 18 beds, you've now increased the project budget by $1.2 million. Doesn't really seem like you saved very much. If we take a look at cutting down to 114 to save the $4.4 million, because that's a larger savings day one, you do still get a savings, but you've cut down to 114 beds and you've only saved $1.4 million. If you go back to that value of what those beds is, that savings doesn't even match up to what the county could gain in net revenue. Go forward. Okay, so outside of cutting square footage and affecting the bed counts and the census, we looked at a couple of other areas, particularly things that were added during the process of the project, as well as things that might be easier to cut off. So when we take a look at those two, as the county office is in Ahern. So this all started because we had a project that previously been approved to make the Ahern building accessible for meetings out there. This is a building that we allow community members to use. County staff uses it quite a bit. The Department of Corrections uses it quite a bit. And also we have nursing home residents that actually have family functions, family Christmas parties, Thanksgiving, and their family members wheel them across the parking lot. And at this point, there's really no good way for them to get in. So the commissioners and delegation had decided several years ago that this needed to be fixed. They approved about $135,000 to tackle this. And when we went out for bid for a design that we had put together, it came in well above that. So at that point, we had already engaged on the renovation project. So we started to look to say, we don't want to really put this much money into the Ahern building. Is what happens when we bring that into the scope of the building. It becomes a better resource for the county to use, to have a nice sized building, to have meetings like this where we are in better control of being able to schedule our own meetings rather than bounce around different places around the county. Resident families can continue to use the space without having to leave the building. So when we took a look at what this added, when we decided to add this scope into the building, we figured that we could pull out about $410,000 out of the project if we deleted what's in blue from the front side of the building. So then that goes back to, we have to accept that if we're not going to build Ahern within the new facility, we have to go back and make those renovations on the existing building. So we would have to do about $200,000 worth of work to Ahern. So if we look at the county offices, so this is on the back side of the building near the Ahern Community Room. Shown here in this little bump out is in orange is the county offices, which represent the county commissioner's staff and the county manager. And so in this area that we look to reduce square footage, you also see in green is a space that's dedicated for the Natural Resources Department, and the blue represents a portion of a space that's dedicated to the Human Resources Department. So if we look at how to cut out this square footage, it also will require us to redesign a solution for both those departments. What this does, this requires a little bit more redesign of building systems, exteriors, and then the adjacent department layouts. We estimated that this would save the project about $465,000, but it doesn't come without impact. So the goal of moving the commissioner's office out of Newport was to create additional space there. Originally, we targeted it for the sheriff's department, but since then we've done a little bit more study, and we feel it would be better suited to the long-term goals of the county is if we looked at moving the UNH Cooperative Extension in there. It's more right-sized for their staff, and that would allow us to vacate the records building and reap whatever revenue came from the sale of that property. And it also avoids about $150,000 in capital projects that need to be put into the records building. So those are two other options that we looked at as a way to potentially cut space out of the building. So if we take a look at those as far as making those changes here today, it's a little bit less impact to the scope, but based on the fact that architects and engineers currently have their own workloads, there is, we have to get back into the queue to get that done. And again, any type of change has to go back to DHHS for review. And so we expected that overall it probably would be a 6-month delay to the project to make those changes and move forward. So looking at taking away the 225 and the 465, and now balance that against the fact that the remainder of the project costs over that 6 months are going to escalate about $2.5 million. So you've now spent $2.5 million to save, I'm terrible at math in my head, about $700,000. So again, to make these types of changes now, the impact on the actual dollars for the deletion of the scope is probably lower than what you would expect, and things continue to rise as we wait to make those changes and eventually end up costing us more money. So there are two scopes that we actually felt were really pretty legitimate to, what I'm gonna say, not eliminate, but to defer. And so it brings more of a conversation when we come into some of the models for funding. As April mentioned, the McConnell unit, built in 1997, has the original finishes. Compared to the rest of the building, it is beautiful. Is it dated? Yes. Is it getting a little tired? Yes. And when you've now completely refinished the remainder of the building, McConnell will stick out as a sore thumb of needing some update. And there's also an advantage, particularly with memory care residents. They like consistency. And so as they move maybe from McConnell to Stearns 3 to go to someplace that feels completely different might be a setback for them. And just from a general kind of curb appeal and feel for the building, to have a nice cohesive building that feels like it's all put together and not just something that's added on, is an important thing. So we refresh the finishes, and then we also look at updating light fixtures to LED for a significant amount of energy savings. If you could go ahead, Sharon. So this we actually thought through back in the design and thought this is pretty much a standalone scope. It would be good to understand what the value of this is, because one, if we need to find some place to carve out, this is the least priority in the building. So it would be good to understand what we're paying for that. So we actually have this already separated for bidding purposes. And based on the numbers that we had gotten last summer, and with some escalation and evaluation of what we have in the budget for furniture, deferring the McConnell aesthetic refresh could probably delete about $1 million from the scope. And so I say defer instead of eliminate, because I think it's important to consider where we are as we progress through the project, because as I'll talk a little bit later, as part of the project, there are areas where we can check in and see where we are in the budget or save potential money. So kind of a deferment plays a little bit different role than taking a look at cutting the scope all completely. The next. So we've also talked about the budget for furniture, furnishings, and equipment, known as FF&E, across the industry. So this is the purchases that the county makes for things that outfit the building. And so there's also an option to defer funding that in the budget until closer to when we actually would purchase it. So right now we're looking at that scope in the budget is about $1.5 million. It has made the assumption that by the time 2 years or 2-3 years comes around, when we're buying the bulk of the furniture, that it will all need to be replaced. At that time, we will be closer to the actual replacement period, and we can do a full evaluation to see what existing furniture will need to be completely replaced, or if there's the potential for some reuse. It's hard this far in advance to make a guess at what the condition of the furniture will be. But if we're looking at possibly taking a smaller bond now and backfilling with another loan later on, there's the possible to defer $1.5 million out of the budget today. And so I will note that I ask you to take away this consideration as a deferment, if you want to change. So it might be a little bit hard to see, but if we think about how tired the building is, the furniture and furnishings are even more so. So Ted and his staff, Ted has in his annual budget an allotment to replace things as needed, but it certainly doesn't come to bringing all the furniture up to date. And so we do the best we can, but this, you can see, this is targeted to resident furniture. You know, there's a varied condition of resident furniture, and our goal is to create a cohesive feel across the facilities and units and create more home-like environments. You remember when we talk about the FGI guidelines and the goals that we have for the project, it's to create those more home-like environments. And lastly is just to create an environment where there's equitable furnishings for all resident rooms. All residents have the same recliner. A resident doesn't have to worry about coming in and not having any furniture, because sometimes they come in with just the bag of clothes that they have. And so we try to scrounge up things that we can, but they look mismatched. And so it would be nice to offer everybody that comes to live at the facility an equitable room. So secondly is staff and office areas. Pretty much all of the furniture is in poor condition. I can tell you that I have yet to see one workstation that is ergonomically correct. The majority of us are using desks back from the day that were built to write, which is a different ergonomic setup than where you use your computer. And then they're just old and tired, and again, typically pulled out of other more public areas. When that furniture gets tired, people have typically grabbed something before it hits the dumpster because they need a chair in their office. So I ask you seriously consider, if we're talking about pulling this out of the budget scope now, it's not because it doesn't need to be done, but it seriously needs to be given consideration at a later date. Okay. So switching topics a little bit is we've heard a lot of questions formally and informally about possibly considering assisted living as another revenue source for the building. So I'm going to invite Ted. Actually, no, I have one slide first. So we looked at a couple of different things. Could we incorporate it into the design as it stands now? Is there a market for that type of service here? What do other counties do? And should we do it? So from a building perspective, which was my part of the evaluation, it was the easy part. We could take the new room layout, which is on the right-hand side. It's a semi-private room. We could turn it from 2 people into 1 people and call one side of the room a living area. And so that would create a private assisted living studio just with a change in furniture. And like I said, that's the easy part. So I'm going to let Ted Purdy come up and talk about the other side of assisted living.
Thank you, Mary. So as it was alluded to certainly before, assisted living as financed by Medicaid is really a separate animal and beast that are required to have its own kind of set of guidelines, construction, requirements of participation. Thing to consider as we go along, the home and community-based services, there was a new requirements that they put on federal CMS guidelines for home and community-based settings that was developed in 2014. Kind of an aside, part of our human services budget is we pay for the 50% of the non-federal match for home and community-based services, which represent about a third of our payment under the human services budget. And it tends to be an average reimbursement. Those people in the community who are primarily Medicaid, who are funded under assisted living, tend to be funded through the home and community-based services waiver, which right now is averaging about $52 a day. Part of that home and community-based services final rule indicated that it advocated for community-based environment where similar to fall in the same community as home-based services. Nursing facilities and hospitals are disqualified as a home and community-based service setting, and settings in a building on the grounds of or adjacent to a public institution are also disqualified as a home and community-based setting. The intent there under CMS is really to provide community access, to be part of the community, and to not have a setting that is considered institutional. And that's the whole basis of that. Next slide. So, is there a market for assisted living? We think so, but there's a lot of dynamics that we certainly need to be able to keep in mind in consideration. In 2007 period, when I first came on board, the county had actually developed plans for a 46-bed independent and assisted living center. It's called the Meadows. It was based on a private pay model where you would make deposits of $100,000 to $200,000 towards that. If people are familiar with things like Kendall at Hanover or Riverwoods at Exeter, that model is really financed through a private pay ongoing model. When the county found itself in difficult financial positions, 2007, 2006, that was one of the first things to go. There are private pay facilities, certainly within the county, that would need to be considered. You know, are we that would compete with, or to evaluate, you know, are we providing additional services to the community? Summercrest and Sunapee Cove come to mind. They've increased the number of beds and units throughout the last 15 years or so. So, you know, the question is, would we need to essentially do another feasibility marketing study to kind of ascertain what the need is for within the community of assisted living beds? And as seen before, we'd also have to consider whether or not those assisted living services under home and community-based care would meet the requirements of a setting and be not institutional in nature. Next slide. So looking at it from a financial standpoint, our current Medicaid daily rate, including ProShare and the Medicaid assessment that we get, is roughly about $283 a day. As I mentioned, the daily Medicaid assisted living rate is about $53 a day. So if you subtract 283 times 53 and multiply it times 365, that represents about $84,000 in lost revenue as compared to our current Medicaid per year per bed. Other facilities, the other counties do have assisted living within there. They were essentially grandfathered. They were built before this 2014 federal requirement under home and community-based services. For example, there again, Most of their rates are run between $2,900 and $3,100 per month for the private rate. When a person comes off or no longer has the resources to fund those, then they move to reimbursement from the home and community-based care services of $53 a day. Merrimack County currently has 29 beds. They lose an average of $200,000 a year. Cheshire County has 20 units, represents about 40 beds. They lose about $35,000 a year. Rockingham County has 49 beds, and they're budgeted to lose $210,000 in this calendar year. Do you want to pick this one up?
Yeah, I can.
Mary?
So, based on what we've learned through evaluating what our other counties do and how they are affected with their assisted living units, and taking a look at the regulations, is we really believe at this time that if assisted living is a service goal of the delegation, then it's time to do a renewed market feasibility study, and we recommend that that effort be pursued separately from this project. So we've investigated and demonstrated that we could not incorporate those assisted living beds into the current facility. So we really feel that tying that as an opportunity to the project delays it and doesn't let us move forward. So on that note, part of that feasibility study would have to be a real investigation on how CMS would allow any type of assisted living facility on the Unity campus adjacent to the nursing home. So I think that's a really complicated project that would need a lot of further study outside of the scope of this project. So after everything that we've talked about tonight and further evaluation of our current design, is we are recommending that we move forward with the current plan immediately. And so there's some things that are looming out in the future as possible risks that make it better to move forward now than to continue to delay the project. So I'll talk a little bit about, the first one is construction climate. And so what are the driving forces in today's construction market? And some of them are a little bit different than even last year, but they've been building for quite some time. So since COVID-19, there's starting to be a rebound in global manufacturing and construction activity after the pandemic. The past and current lower interest rates are encouraging borrowing across all sectors. So you have the commercial construction trades are looking for the same materials that the residential construction trades are looking for. So we see that happening everywhere. So we've talked about this for a few years: rising labor rates and construction trade labor availability challenges. That's a problem way bigger than we can solve here, but it continues to drive some costs. Supply chain issues, including material backlogs, fuel prices, and shortfalls in trucking, creating long lead times. And then also too, the construction market is also being driven by an unprecedented government intervention to support the economy, whether it's individuals receiving their $5,600 for a family stipend as part of the COVID relief and choosing to invest that in their homes, or things like we're talking about the ARPA funding coming or a subsequent infrastructure bill. Those things are driving people to pursue building projects. So to move forward. Just to take a couple of little telltale signs that we look at from a commercial side when we're looking at where the costs of things are growing. This represents copper, which is one of the major materials used in both mechanical systems and electrical wiring. This graph shows a history of the prices from 2012 through last week when I pulled this report. So in Q1 alone, it was up 15%, and the price of copper is up 75% compared to 1 year ago. There are expectations that it's going to start to begin leveling, but you can see from other areas when it's been up high, it doesn't come back real fast. It goes up fast, but doesn't come down fast. Same thing for the steel market. Over the past year, there's been a 4 to 6% increase per month, every month. The thoughts also too is that steel is going to begin to level this next quarter, starting in a few weeks from now. And so mills still at our production rate below what can meet demand. There's a lot of demand for steel out there. So I've asked Brian Garris from Milestone Engineering and Construction, who is our construction manager on this job, to just talk a little bit about the specific New Hampshire climate. I talked a little about some national indexes, but I think it's important to understand that our climate here in New Hampshire is a little bit unique and not necessarily can be translated from some of the national index that we see out there. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. Mary asked me to touch base on this. There's a lot of stuff in the news, and you'll see in the national information coming out about the economy and projects down. We saw a lot of it being real specific to Massachusetts and Boston, where things kind of slowed down when COVID took over. A lot of that was driven directly with the specific state of Massachusetts and the city of Boston. There was a real drive to just lock things down, so they kind of put some quick mandates in and closed jobs down. They quickly figured out that with the housing demand they had down there and the need to put people in them, that they needed to start construction back up pretty quick to try to catch up. They're still scrambling. If you've ever been to Boston recently, it's tower cranes everywhere. But New Hampshire kind of stayed a little bit out of that, and we had the same gut reaction. Okay, what's going to happen when COVID gets in? We didn't see a drastic change, and we just kind of kept our head down and just kind of saw the market continue. There was a lot of projects that were already funded. Those proceeded. We had one for a local police department down in Tilton that we actually got through town meeting, got it approved right before everybody kind of went into the shutdown, and we built the project through COVID. So New Hampshire's a little unique in the fact that, especially Sullivan County and up in the North Country, where you've got a little bit of insulation from the national market. We're seeing things like Mary talked about, copper and steel. Copper's up and down weekly. Lumber's been the latest one that's been up, that was in the 300% range increase in the last year. But in the last week or so, we're seeing things start to level out on that. So we just want to stress that with everything we've heard tonight about costs going up in general, nothing related to the climate, just increase in costs, that we're going to see this continue to go. I mean, we talk quite a bit about if this was to delay a full year. We're telling people right now we're seeing 7 to 10% escalation costs on projects. So we got projects that we're putting numbers to now that are for next year, and we have to throw those numbers right on the bottom. They don't like to see them, but if you want to be in the right spot when it's time to start building, we feel those are important. One of the things 2008, when things, at least from our end of it in construction, started to go down a little bit, there was enough work in the pipeline. We didn't really physically feel the workload drop till probably the beginning of 2011. So you see the increase in the prices and the jobs coming on, but then the decline takes time. So this isn't something where let's just hit the pause button for 6 months to a year, price is going to drop, and we'll just be ready to sail on, beyond all the other issues that we talked about tonight. We also keep an eye on the architects' load of work and what they're designing. As you've heard tonight, there's 6 months to a year of work before we get to construction. So if the architects right now are busy, and we're seeing most of them out there are still steaming along, that we look at that as kind of a goal line, that we see that if they start slowing down, then we know that 6 months to a year we might start feeling some of that. So with what we've seen right now, they're out there. RFPs with requests for proposals are out there. I mean, I had 2 interviews today, we were here today. 2 RFPs went out this week, are going out this week. The stuff's coming through, and that's the signs of an active market. Some of that's the funds that are becoming available. Municipalities are getting the funding from the federal government, so they're using it. They want to get that out there. So that's a good sign for us when the RFPs keep coming. We do a lot of work at UNH. UNH dropped off for a while because they basically closed a lot of the campus down and locked it down for the students' protection. Those projects just got pushed aside. They're all coming out right now. We're all putting in RFPs for 2022 projects. So we're encouraged by what we see. We think the timing is right. We've been through this with the bidding, when we put the earlier budgets together. Some of the subcontractors that at the time were extremely busy are now at the point where they're saying, if that comes back around, we want to be in on the pricing of it. So we have subcontractors that may have at the time been too busy to price that are willing now to jump in. So I see a very encouraging process there, and it's a good time to be out.
Thanks, Brian. So as Brian mentioned, and the last point on the slide was the escalations locally between 7 to 10%. I think it is important to note that the current budget that we're working with at $54 million was what we put together last year to account for what it would be to start to have a project approved this spring. And so any further delay in the project would only add that 7 to 10% on to delay it into the fall or even into next year. So to talk a little bit about some potential risks that we see in the borrowing climate, and I by no means am an economist, but I took a look at the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank, a 5-year look back, and so some of the interest rates that we've been seeing are record lows, particularly in July of 2020 and January of 2021. They haven't released their July of 2021 round that we just missed, but those were record low opportunities for borrowing. And so this graph, the green represents the dollar amount of bonding that the municipal bond bank funded, and the blue represents the interest rate. So one thing that we've learned about, we knew a little bit about it, we've pursued it a little bit more, is an opportunity to bond individually off-cycle. And so the municipal bond bank has an option when it's a significant dollar amount for a bond that ours would qualify for. And so this allows you to bond off-cycle at any time during the year. What borrowers tend to see at that time is a slightly higher interest rate, and Sullivan County, as the borrower, would have to pay the administration fees. So they gave us this example of a off-cycle borrowing effort that just happened back in May. 4 New Hampshire communities refinanced existing debt, saving $3 million. And so it was $32 million that they borrowed. It was a 20-year note, and the rate was 1.69%. And so for that dollar amount, they paid about $137,000 in administrative fees. So if you think about what the project could incur waiting till a January time period with not only the escalation but a potential rise in interest rates, this option allows us at a lesser price to move forward more quickly by pursuing this. So just as I'm wrapping it up here, I just want to take a look at some of the funding options, because there's been a few things that have been thrown out at previous meetings. And I know this is hard to see, I apologize, but the top line references if we were to now fund the full project budget for $54 million as it has been presented, we'd be looking at about a $41 million bond, $5 million out of the capital reserve, and as Derek mentioned earlier, $8 million from the ARPA funds. And so I know at a previous meeting, Representative Aaron brought up the possibility of bonding for less right now and mentioned possibly a $35 million bond. And so the middle line basically spreads that out in the same way, but indicates that that would leave about $6 million unfunded. And so after that question, I went back and took a look at what we would be obligated to fund in order to sign contracts for the construction project. So we would need to make sure that we have the complete amount of money to pay the construction manager, as well as the soft costs that we're obligated for. The necessary things like permitting and inspections, the construction administration of the project and contract by the architect. And so when we take a look at that to make sure that that is fully funded, we would look for the minimum amount of bond that we could move forward with. A $54 million project is $38 million. That leaves about $3 million unfunded. If we looked at possible things that we've talked about tonight, it makes it logical that we could talk about deferring funding for the McConnell Aesthetic Refresh and the FF&E. That brings us pretty close to the $3 million. Yeah, just highlighted that. But so that gets us funded today at the $54 million. But the other thing too is that we are constantly on the look for other people's money. And there's some potential out there that could come at a later date, not particularly right now when we need it, but it could come to help offset some of the things that we're talking about. We recently applied for a $2 million congressional directed spending request with Senator Shaheen. That's a possibility. Just the other day, they announced some additional ARPA money that's being sent to the state that communities could apply for. There's the Biden infrastructure plan, or whatever it ends up being named when it finally goes through, and what amount that covers, we don't know. There's energy rebates. We haven't even talked about what the possibility of energy rebates are. And when we think to a comparable, really a not so comparable scope at Sullivan House, we've qualified for about $80,000 at Sullivan House. A much smaller project than we're talking about here. So that could potentially be a lot of money to help reinforce some of those deferments. As part of the natural process, there's a process during the GMP when we're putting the pricing together or finalizing flooring selections or other selections, is a lot of times the contractors come with a subsequent product that they feel is equitable to what we've specified, but it might cost a little less. That's just the natural progression of the project, where we as a project team make responsible decisions for the project and take advantage of savings opportunities when they present themselves. And then lastly is when the bond funds are deposited into our bank accounts, hopefully they'll make a little bit of interest, and that money could be directed back towards the unfunded portions of the project. So there's potential places that we can recoup some money to help offset that. So I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Hebert for some closing remarks, but at this time, I believe he would say that, and I hope he says, that that the most responsible action is moving forward with a 156-bed design that meets the current and future needs of the nursing home. We've had an experienced and dedicated team on this for 3 years that have looked at this building inside and out. We've benchmarked against other counties and other experiences that they've had, and leveraged experiences that the team has had working on other county nursing homes, as well as experience within the project management and building community. Construction prices are not expected to drop anytime soon. Cost indexes show signs of inflation, and rising interest rates should follow that if we follow the typical standard. We have the availability of ARPA money that wasn't available in the past. And as Derek mentioned earlier, every day the building continues to fail, and we're seeing some significant emergent things that are happening that are starting to signal that it's getting really tired, and it's a really difficult place to work. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to answer some of the questions and concerns that you have expressed in previous meetings, as well as things that have come to us through the grapevine. So, Commissioner Hebert?
Thank you, Mary. Well, I think that's pretty undisputable information. I want to thank these guys, 'cause they put hours and hours into this, and I really hope they answered all your questions. This is not a political issue, this is a people issue. As you could clearly see by the information and the things you heard, we know the building's in bad shape. We know it's not a desirable place for a lot of people to work and people to stay. And I don't know if you can put a price tag on a building that needs to be, redone. And put a price tag on the people that spend the time there and the people that go there for the end of their days. If we're gonna operate and run a facility like this in this county, I really think we need to responsibly take the time and really think about how we want to handle this project. I am really not open, personally, as a commissioner. I'll let Ben and Joe decide for themselves. But I think the time spent on this project is ample enough. I really would not like to entertain any more questions on what we can do, how we can do it better. I think those answers have all been laid out. And I think it's come down to a time where this is the time to make a decision on this project. And I would really appreciate the delegation to move forward. Take a vote one way or the other, whether you agree or not agree. But the county needs to move forward. We need to take care of these people. We need to take care of the building. And with or without your support, we still have to maintain this building and take care of the people in this county. So thank you all for listening. I don't really know if we need to entertain any questions.
Yeah, just one, this slideshow, could be sent to every member of the delegation, because there were members who weren't here or had to leave early?
Yeah, I don't see
If
why.
possible, I'd like to look, I've taken notes, but nevertheless, I think I missed probably, you have only so much time.
Yeah.
I'd like to look at the.
No, sure. Any information that was here tonight is all public.
So if
knowledge,
I don't know, if the county manager would, however, take care of it to every member of the delegation, I would request that, please.
And this has been recorded?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we've taken hundreds of hours of these people's time and time away from their jobs. A lot of it's personal time that they spent doing this stuff. And really, they've gone, way beyond and above what most people would probably do. And I really applaud them for that. And so, really, thanks for listening. I appreciate it, yes.
I missed the last 2 points in the panel on the additional funding possibilities. Is it possible to go back there? Because I had a question on what the value engineering was composed of.
Can you bring that back?
Well, Mary, you want to?
I can just
Mary
speak
can
to
tell you.
that.
Thanks again.
So value engineering is a process that you go through within the project. When the documents go out, we make recommendations on types of products and products that meet our specification for quality and longevity. And like anybody, we are open to suggestions by people that work in that field from the day-to-day basis and are installing things every day. And so a lot of times what will happen is a subcontractor will suggest an alternate way to solve an issue or an alternate product to use. And then we, as a project team, evaluate that suggestion. And a lot of times it can generate significant savings to the projects. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes we might feel that the product just isn't necessarily equitable to what we want to accomplish. One example that happens a lot that we really don't know how that all shakes out is lighting. You can have one electrician that buys from one specific lighting house, these lighting manufacturers, and somebody else that buys from another. And depending on how those shakes out, we look at the fixtures, and sometimes there can be a significant difference. But that's a part of the natural process that happens, and that's part of what the county pays me as a project management professional, as well as our architects and our construction managers, to find the best value for the county.
You know, because this project has so many nuances and it's complex, that's a good attitude to approach it with, to look for savings and better materials and ways and means during the course of a project.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep. Mr. Chair, Brian has.
All right, yeah, Representative Sullivan, I think, has a question.
Thank you. I agree with, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Damn.
I can hear you.
Yeah, Lee can hear me. Can you hear me in the room? Okay. I want to agree with George that I appreciate all the time that's been put into all of this, this work. And I'm sure that a lot of time has been put in, but one of my concerns is, and I want to ask this to the commissioners and the manager, it doesn't appear that there were any competitive bids done on the construction work. And I'd like to hear their thoughts on why it was done that way rather than putting it out to multiple companies.
Answer that. There was competitive bidding that was done back almost 3 years ago. We sent out a pretty intensive RFP for request for proposal for construction management services, for which we probably received 8 to 10 proposals for. That was shortlisted, and we interviewed, I think, maybe 4 between Commissioner Hebert, Ted Purdy, and myself. And the proposals were evaluated on qualification, references, and construction manager fee. And so, so that was competitively bid. And so that was, their qualifications were compared, as well as the construction management fee. And at that time, not only was Milestone Engineering Construction what we felt to be the most qualified for this project based on their previous work, their previous experience with Rockingham County coming off of a renovation very similar to ours, is their fee was actually the lowest of all too. So not only did we get what we felt to be the best qualified firm, it was also the one that brought the most value to the county as far as determination of fee. So what happens at this point is the construction manager manages the process for us in bidding the subcontracts. And so that effort was done last July, where they developed what we call the GMP, or the Guaranteed Maximum Price. And so that goes out to bid across a wide network of subcontractors. And at that point, we review the bids and make selections for the subcontractors that we want to have on the job. Typically, we would evaluate those in the same way that the commissioners would evaluate any I guess, engagement with a contractor that we would have. And there's a wide variety of categories that we look at. So if you remember when we did that last July, the project was not voted to move forward at this time. That effort of bidding has expired, and so we would need to do that again. So not only has competitive bidding happened in the qualification and proposal state where we engage with Milestone, it will happen again when we develop the GMP.
go ahead. Representative Merchant, Commissioner Hebert wanted a question.
Yes.
If I may, Mr. Thank you for sharing the slides and also knowing this has been taped. I saw in the proposal a couple of slides, you talked about a decrease in revenue, which I respect and appreciate. However, we never saw a decrease in expenses. So when you talk about a decrease in revenue, are we talking about a decrease in expenses, or the expenses are gonna stay the same and revenues goes down?
Everything was presented as net revenue. Ted, do you wanna comment on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so our projections, we took a look at the revenue, but we also decreased what the projected expenses would be for major expenses, food, medical supplies, staff, depending on the level of services provided on a per patient day.
Thank you. And then the other thing too I saw is that if we take $5 million out of the capital reserve fund, how much is there now?
Jared, do you know the total?
Right now, it's a little over 5.
So if we take all of the money out of the capital reserve fund and something happens at the nursing home, how do we pay for the repairs?
There's five for this project, that's not the total.
We leave
Wait a
very
minute.
little, I mean,
Okay.
basically drain it. So
We're gonna drain it basically, right? So if we're gonna drain it. So if something happens in the next 2 years, we're gonna have to pay for it, how?
Oh, it's a great question. I mean, those are all the trade-offs that we have to discuss as part of this. We're just presenting a starting point. But yes, if we take less out of capital reserve because we feel like it's too risky, then we'll have to make up for that elsewhere.
In the bond.
Yes.
And then also in the, if I may, Mr. Chairman, if the ARPA, do we have confirmation from someone in the federal government that we can use the ARPA fund within the construction? Because I'm hearing conflict, not from you personally, but from the state delegation, the federal delegation, well, we can and cannot use the ARPA, so I hate to be counting on $8 million if all of a sudden we only can use half of it. And I'm not sure exactly what the constraints are. Have we got any documentation from somebody in the know, at the federal level, saying, yes, you can use it for these reasons, and given the project and saying, yes, these are things in the project we approve?
The answer to that is I don't know. Everything I've read so far leads me to believe that we would be okay, but obviously, as you pointed out, there's a lot of differing interpretations.
Yeah.
The interim final guidance that the Treasury Department released, they're now in a phase of allowing people to generate FAQs, frequently asked questions, and they're responding to those. I think it's about every week they publish the latest iteration, but you have until July 9th to post questions. I haven't done so yet because I've been preoccupied with this, but I did plan on asking specifically, trying to do it in a way that's nice and succinct, because they've said that anything that's related to COVID, capital investments to improve, they don't use the term long-term care facilities, but basically any public health care facility is okay. So I would interpret that to mean, like, for example, our entire HVAC system, one could make a very strong, compelling argument that I don't think anybody would disagree with, that an HVAC system is an integral part of any sort of future COVID-related or other pandemic response. And beyond that, the separation, the ability to space and socially distance residents, I think you could make arguments for that. But I think the slam dunk is the HVAC system. If we just said, look, we don't have a central air facility or a system, I think that part of this project alone was 8 to 10 million-ish.
Yeah.
So I think we could just write a check and say, okay, we're buying an HVAC system that's going to help us manage a future pandemic. But I want to get more fidelity in the answers from the Treasury guidance, and so we're working. We'll know, I would expect this summer. I don't know if they're going to, after the July 9th window closes, how much longer it'll take for them to respond to all the questions. I imagine they're getting bombarded, but.
There is actually some more guidance in the email that you sent yesterday in regards to the additional ARPA funds that are coming to the state. It talked about community measures to address COVID, and it pointed to a CDC article which defined what community measures are, and it covers things like separation, maintaining social distancing. There were things specific related to at-risk populations and all the things that we have to do to help create a better infection control environment. So it didn't specifically spell out that these are specifically approved, but it referenced that article with the CDC. So there's some more information there on what mitigating community measures are that made me believe even more so that we would have no problem addressing funds from this project to that.
What I want to try to tease out, and again, I haven't thought through this yet, but because everything's so interconnected and one upgrade of a particular system can trigger compliance with all the other standards, what I want to know is, well, if we do this one thing, but it makes us have to do this $50 to $55 million thing, can we not use every penny that we've been given towards the whole project because it's doing this one system that triggered the larger project? I don't know what kind of answer we're going to get out of that, but that's what I'm hoping to try to tease out. But I don't want to write them a miniature War and Peace, because I know what it's like to be a staffer trying to answer those things.
The other thing that I wanted to address, I think was the first part of your question, and also was implied earlier in the meeting, that none of our building problems are solved until this project is done 3 years from now. That is not necessarily true. One of the first phases in the project is actually to reroute the main steam line that comes into the building. Currently, it runs right into Sanders and crosses the whole ground floor basement of Sanders through main corridor, through kitchen storage, central supply storage, the facility shop on its way to the boiler room. That pipe is where we have significant leaks on a daily basis, particularly in the winter. And that is steam. That is high pressure steam. And it can create very dangerous situations. One of the first things that we do is get it out of the Sanders building and put it underground around back to where the new boiler room would be. So within the first several months of the project, we are taking care of things that present risks to us on a daily basis. Does that mitigate the fact that we could have a major failure sometime in the next 3 years? Yeah, it could, but you know what? I would feel a lot better having a crew of construction workers on site with plumbers and electricians and carpenters to help solve something that came up. Is it in their scope? No, it's not, but I can tell you on any construction site, it's a team that works together to mitigate things like that. So we would be in a better situation to handle something that came up if we had a major failure before that part of the scope was incurred.
Well, and besides the 5 million, there's what, 25,000 emergency fund, right? And a nursing home contingency fund, so there is, what's that, 2 million?
If we transfer the 200,000 back into it, we'll have a $2.5 million starting balance.
Yeah, so there's,
If we don't drain every penny of that to help offset decreased census and revenue associated with that, yes, that could
so
be another.
there's other funding besides that 5 million that could be tapped.
And then the idea too is it is a project budget. So we do have contingency built in there as far as the project scope is concerned. I will tell you, in my career as a project manager, your goal is to give money back at the end. And so whatever contingency left could supplement where we move forward in the capital reserve fund. So, the idea is to not spend every single penny. The idea is to bring the project under budget. And be able to return that money. And that's the same goal that the construction manager has with their budget, is to bring us the most savings they can with a product that meets our goals.
Any more questions?
Oh, I got a whole page of
Is there something else you would like to ask?
Well, no, it's just a question. I think it answers a lot of my questions. I want to say thank you for that. But as I listened to the 40 slides and went through the presentation, which was well done, well orchestrated, it just raised more questions that I'm trying to ask. And it sounds like that's not the time for this to be done at some other time. So I would say back to a future discussion is to have time for me to go digest what I heard tonight, to then ask questions about what I heard. Because you answer the questions, which is great, but it does raise questions that I have on, why can't we buy the furniture this year?
And store it.
What I'm saying is that we could start, some of the stuff we could start now, because we're gonna have to do that anyways, as we look at this whole project. I don't hate to see certain things being delayed if we can do some action today. If there's things we can do today, I don't know what those things are as we go through this process. Or the other thing, maybe, Mr. Hibbert, you're looking at and saying it's either an up or down vote, and that's what you're asking for.
Well, what this whole process just did, it did exactly what the delegation wanted us to do, is to keep the cost at a good bonding point where it was justifiable, that everybody felt comfortable with. And that's what we did. And we've stretched it out over time so that it's exactly what you asked for. I don't know what else we can do. I mean, we can play around with this thing for a long, long time and not get anywhere with it. I don't know, as far as buying stuff early, putting stuff off, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but, I mean, I guess that's something we could look into, but.
I mean, to me, we could buy tables and chairs, store them in the barn for 2 years.
Why?
How, every time you move a table and chair, it gets dinged up a little bit. And as Mary said, in 2 years, some of the furniture that we have could be usable. We don't know exactly what furniture that we have now can be usable in 2 years. It just, that really seems putting the cart before the horse, is buying the furniture now and then design the building around the furniture.
Well, let me phrase it another way.
I was just answering the question you asked.
Well, it is. I'm trying to get to is that what I'm hearing is that we have up or down vote. And if it's down, then what's Plan B?
Plan B is to move on.
Okay.
Keep patching what's there.
That's all we can do. And that's what we want. That's why we want to end this process. And we're just asking the delegation to move forward and to make a decision so that we can move forward with taking care of the people that we need to take care of. So.
I would somewhat be reluctant to spend soft costs ahead of hard costs, because soft costs at the backside can be made up gradually, where hard costs halfway through the project, if you've got brand new beds and brand new tables and you don't have any place to put them because you ran yourself too low, or we got to come back and ask for more money, that wouldn't fit in with my thinking.
I would say, maybe I was for myself, I can only speak for myself. When this was being proposed, what I was hoping for was a Plan B or C alternative. We talked about it, but no matter what's been said or done, we're back to Plan A. And Plan A is on the table. Plan B, we talked about, you shot it down. You talked about Plan C, shot it down. We're going back to Plan A. And that's what I'm trying to get to, is that I'm still being asked to vote on Plan A.
Okay, I'm new here, so I didn't go through the whole process, but I did go through the process of having it all explained to me. And Plan B and C were looked at, and Plan A rose to the top. If you have a Plan B or C that we didn't look at, and you can give it to us, unfortunately, it's gonna put it off, and every month we put this off, the price goes up. But I am sure there was a Plan B and there was a Plan C, and they got overlooked because Plan A rose to the top.
So, may I step in?
Yes, you may.
So I think when we go back to Plan B and C and D, it goes back to the August 2020 meeting where we did say that the GMP came back in higher than what we expected. It was time to take a step back and look at what our options are. And so at that point in subsequent meetings, we ran through what those options are to where we investigated with Warren Street and Milestone, what it would be to build a new building on site, what it would be to build a building off-site. We looked at, now we've looked at how we reduce square footage to try to meet a goal. That was one of the options that we had, is give us a number and we will try to meet that goal. We did that in one of the options that we presented here tonight because we heard that we think that you should be around 135 beds. So, you know, one of the easier solutions that we had, which is still a bad solution, was to meet this made-up goal of 135 beds. So I think we have presented those options, and in the half a dozen meetings that we have had since last summer, we have come back with that information and not moved forward. And the reason that we keep coming back is because this scope represents what the best value and product is based on the more than 3 years worth of work that this team has put in. And so I'll tell you, at one time with this scope, it was a larger building. Like, we did a lot of effort to dual utilize spaces to shrink it down. And so this thing has been chipped away to meet the requirements. A lot of the space that we include, a lot of the systems that we have to have, it's all regulated by various codes and requirements. It's not because we choose to have this type of ventilation system or a resident has this much space. Those are dictated to us. The size of the building on the upper 3 floors is built around the regulated minimum size of a resident room to have clearances that meet those requirements. And so you can't do much with that. That's what it is. And then the ground floor, we have had considerable amount of time squeezing that and squeezing that to where it is a good product. And so we have addressed alternate plans. And so I think we're at the point now that whatever we look at as Plan B2, C2, it's not going to meet our goals. It's not going to meet our goals. And it's not going to meet the requirements. And so I think that's why we keep going back to this plan, because we've presented information on all the other options, and they've been too expensive or not made sense or whatever it is. And we keep coming back to this because this is what works. Thank you.
Representative Gallo?
As for me, I think we've waited too long. And I don't want to wait longer for a new code book to come out and more inflation to hit, which is going to be a big bang. That's just, I don't have a glass ball any more than anybody else, but I suspect that all the inflation that has been built in from money being printed over the last 15 years is probably going to come to fruition, and we're going to wish we'd done this 3 years ago.
If you guys want to have, I talked about this person from, that reached out and wants to meet with you. If you guys want to open that precedent, if somebody calls and wants to come in and meet, if you guys want to convene a meeting, I will make every effort to show up. But are you going to do that for everybody? I mean, there's probably more than one architect, more than one builder in the county that would be interested. So if you guys want to have a meeting, I will make every attempt to be there.
Yeah, thank you. The goal is not to open up to have a competing, it's more to listen to what they did, why they did it, understand it, and see if there's anything we can learn from it as we design or go forward with what we're doing. It may turn out that everything you say just reinforces everything we've heard.
Did they bid on the original, were they original bidder? I don't remember.
No.
So they didn't bid
Not that I'm aware of.
on the project? Well, if they did, that.
Maybe check on
They
it.
didn't, okay.
No.
Because, I mean, some of the other previous bidders might want to come.
Correct, but they didn't bid on it.
I know, but if somebody did call you, are you going to entertain them also? I guess there's questions you guys need to think about.
Question.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
You were asked by members of the delegation to investigate and report, prices and aspects and facts of reducing bed size. And you did that, not with just one, but a number of scenarios. But your recommendation is to go with the original plan of 156 beds. Okay. My question to the rest of the delegation and my colleagues, is there any appetite for what you saw in the reduction of beds, the 118, the 138,
138.
whatever? And if there is an interest in that and you think that's feasible, are you ready to make a motion to forward that
We can't
particular
tonight.
option?
We can't tonight because we're on non-meeting, well.
Well, yeah, I know, but
Oh,
that's a
okay.
question that I'm curious about.
I would say, to answer your question, Representative Stapleton, when I look back at the nice arrow that was going up from 2015 to 2060, whatever it was, from 126 beds to 160 beds, based upon what was on that diagram, in 2025, it should be up to 160. I don't think we're near 160. That's only 4 years away. So I'm looking at that graph, that growth and so forth. It doesn't seem to be that we're following that projection. So if you go back and look at it where we are today, and I look at back at the census in 2003, our census and our bed occupancy is pretty much the same as it was 2003. Hasn't changed a lot. So therefore, if we're down on the census, I'm just saying this whole issue about the growth and so forth, what I don't know, and I'd like to hear more about, is what impact is the aging in place going to have on demand for beds? Because I haven't heard somebody to come in and talk to us and say their projections with aging in place is going to impact nursing home utilization. And that's the part that I'm trying to understand, because I'm hearing from other people at the national level in their projections that the aging in place is going to have an impact on nursing home occupancy.
All right.
The projections that were made, one were through a marketing feasibility study, the 160, that considered the rate of population change, the rate of percentage of residents that are likely to be into a nursing facility. And those projections, 128 to 160, were based on an analysis of that 2015 census study and projections through, it goes in, I don't know, 2040 or something like that. But a reasonable projections as to where we expect the population in Sullivan County to go. We expect, one of our slides indicated that between now and 2025, the population of over 65 in Sullivan County is to increase by 65%. So.
In 4 years?
Pardon me?
In 4 years?
No, I think in 10.
We didn't have that, but this is what we had.
There-
I think what you're referring to.
Right, but the basis for that, one of the previous aspects, that it was within, I think within 10 or 15 years. So.
And if I can, Commissioner, what I'm trying to get to is that when I talk to people at the national level, what they're now looking at is there's a lot of movement, even at the state level, as well as the federal level, to put more dollars and resources in community-based care.
And I've seen that for 30 years.
Yes.
And so there's a misnomer that the home and community-based care waivers will meet the needs of long-term care residents in the future. It does help, there again, we pay for that under the non-federal share.
Right.
It does help and oftentimes defer time, but it traditionally, it does not impact being able to decrease the number of nursing home beds in the long run.
I think, April, you talked about the pandemic of memory loss or Alzheimer's. Elaborate on that.
Yeah, so, you know,
See you.
we are still seeing a demand for, you know, increasing.
See you. Take care.
If
Well, I guess you're not interested?
No, no.
She was addressing the question, if
Yeah.
anybody wants to listen.
I don't think they really want to listen.
It's just the long ways to go.
Yeah,
So,
Derek?
Representative Richard, the question you asked is a great one. It's a crystal ball question, but it is a good one. I mean, I think what we have seen, and I'm pretty sure we've answered this question, or discussed at least, is the impact of people aging in place is that we are seeing residents stay for shorter durations. It's not that they don't stay or come to the nursing home at all, it's that when they do come, it's much closer, because they have stayed at home longer, and that's great. But there does become a time where they exceed the ability of either themselves or their caregivers to care for them, and it's not safe, and they come to our facility, but it's for a shorter duration.
And you're saying exactly what they're saying in a sense.
Right, but that doesn't mean you build less beds, it just means the people in those beds don't stay as long.
But we're not, our
And I think when
capacity
you
hasn't
look at
been,
that, plus the demographic trends where the population is expected to get older, how do these factors all interact? Some would call for reduction in beds, some would call for an increase in beds. You put them all together, and it's impossible to predict. So, you know, I think we've studied this.
Pre-COVID, our census was what, 135, 134?
Well, actually, that's what I was gonna get to, is so, you mentioned back in '03, our census is about the same as it was. Well, Ted's presented data where, I believe, the highest year we've had, it was 148. That was average census for an entire year. Now, that was a spike, that was a one-off. But we did acknowledge that we did need to increase census, and shortly after April was hired, we made a concerted effort to increase admissions. In the 3 months prior to COVID, we averaged just above 140. That was 3 consecutive months. The highest it peaked was at 142.5, I believe.
And that's not taking every referral that comes to our facility. It's
And I think
getting
one of the-
back to that bed management. I'm sorry to
And
interrupt
one of
there.
the takeaways from that bed
Yeah.
management is there are 5 people right now in McConnell that
Yep.
probably could and should move to Stearns 3, and that's really where that flow is, because I know at one of the previous meetings, we all discussed that we acknowledge that dementia care is the growth industry for our facility. Right now, McConnell is the bottleneck because of the discrepancy between the condition of McConnell and the family's perception of Stearns 3. So they don't want their loved ones to move, which was what April talked about. If we fix that, and if we take the 3-month trend pre-COVID of averaging 140, is it all likely to continue? And I think it is. That 5-person movement from McConnell up to Stearns 3 gets us from 140 to 145 without even breaking a sweat. And now, because the operational capacity is 148, and we can hopefully get away from this, well, why do we have 156 if we're running at 136? That's 20 empty beds. We know it's not 20 empty beds, that's an oversimplified way of looking at it. So going from 148 to 145, now we're in the realm of if we build it, they will come in terms of the short-term rehab. I think it's every expectation that we'll be back into that mid to high 140 census range on average going forward. But again, that's my crystal ball, and I could be full of crap too.
But
But
that's the nursing director's crystal ball.
Yeah, that's my crystal ball, because I'm saying no to people all the time, because we don't have appropriate beds. It's not just that we need an empty bed, we need appropriate beds. We don't have them, because we can't move them off of McConnell.
So we're turning people away.
Commissioner Hebert?
Yeah.
This kind of dialogue I would have more of if we could, because it helps to answer the questions operationally what's going on for myself anyways. I don't know about the other delegation members, but a lot of the things I'm hearing tonight helps me frame what is there. To have somebody get up and give a one monologue, which is great, it helps to answer the question, but it raises more questions. It doesn't have it's not a dialogue, it's a monologue. And I think what I'm looking for is more of a dialogue.
Well, you know, we're really running out of time for dialogue. I don't know what else we can do, in no disrespect to any delegate members. You all have the right to have your opinions, and I totally agree with that. But like I've said right along, we're running out of time. Now is the time to make a decision, and that's all we want the delegates to do. If you don't totally understand the project, then you do what you want to do. We're not going to force you to vote one way or another on whether this project moves forward. But I think we're at a kind of a stalemate where we can play chess for years and not get anywhere, or we can just settle this matter now, and this is the time to do it. You know, like I said, no disrespect. Every time we answer a question, you ask another question, and it's, I don't know where we can end this, Mr. Merchant, but as far as I'm concerned,
And part of our frustration is the question was asked tonight, well, how come you didn't competitively bid that? God, we did. You know, the bid packages for the architect, for the construction manager, for every 2x4 that was in the thing was bid for that guaranteed small price, for a guaranteed maximum price, that we had back last fall.
But-
So just people not being engaged and asking the same question gets frustrating to us.
Question?
yes.
You folks have been going through a lot of detail and a lot of research, drill down and work. And I've been following it. I've got no problem with what you've told me, and you've repeated a lot of this material, not once, twice, but a number of times. I've got no problem with comprehension of it. I almost feel like I've worked there. When I was younger, I might apply for a job, but I got a job already. I guess what I'm saying is that if there's any member, any colleague that has still open questions, maybe it's time for some personal investigation to look at those questions in research.
If people tell me they can't see
You
it.
guys were done at 9 p.m. I'm still recording it, so the VOD of it will be going out, but we were informed to only carve out a 3-hour block tonight. But
Anyways, I'm in support of the project as you recommend it.
Because there's people, the delegates that can't, is representatives that can't listen to it, so they can't.
Are they on Zoom call? If they have access to the Zoom call, they should be able to hear, otherwise they're watching the television.
A couple of people have asked about bid. Can we share that, the document with the bidders? That's not public though. How can we? Well, just to show folks that have said, did you bid this? I suppose they
The
could.
full discussion was
told them we
recorded
did,
in the
and if they
meeting
don't
minutes of
believe
the
us,
I was there.
commissioners
Yeah, I
meeting.
know, I was,
Just,
The full discussion was recorded in the meeting minutes of the
Okay.
commissioners' meetings.
It's there.
just an FYI that they cannot see it anymore. They have, any of the representatives that are listening cannot see it anymore. They have to dial in on their phone.
Well, it's being recorded, right?
Yeah, so just let, but they can't ask questions, that's what I'm saying.
And they can ask. There's nothing that's really seen.
Yep.
So if everybody's done asking questions, I'd like to adjourn this meeting.
I'll second that.
No, this is
Got a
ours.
hand up?
So before you adjourn this meeting, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you for all of your work, your dedication, all of the hours and hours and hours of putting presentation after presentation after presentation together to give us as much information as we could possibly use to make this very, very important and very large decision which will affect this county for the next 50 years going forward. But in my mind, I just want to thank you all, from the commissioners to the department heads to everybody involved in the architects and planners. You've done an amazing job and given us so much to think about and consider. And so I want to thank you very much. As for me, as a delegate, I have no question in my mind that the project that you've presented that we have in front of us is the project that we need to do. The time is now. Our residents are waiting. The people, the employees are waiting. It needs to be done. And I have had every question answered, and I have no reservations at all in voting in favor of moving ahead with this. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Same here.
I'll second that. And I.
Okay, Commissioner